with the leading minds from the social media world. And everyone understood they had a mandate from the highest levels, and they had a mandate that was resourced, right, that had funding behind it so they could actually do their job. And then there was an end product, unclassified, that was for the use of candidates, states, local governments, so that everyone could take those best practices and implement them at the local level. That, I think, would be wonderful. There is no reason why we don't have that right now.
So we've talked about national security some, and you also have mentioned the economy and the middle class. What are the other issues that really drive you in your campaign?
Yeah, sort of as I said, there's the great squeeze on the middle class is one bucket of issues, and the other one is what I call environmental security. People worried about their water and their waters, right? We're the Great Lakes state. We have the largest concentration of fresh water in the world, and 1 out of every 5 jobs here in Michigan is connected to clean Great Lakes. So it's very bipartisan here, keeping our Great Lakes clean, keeping invasive species out. But the irony has not missed anyone that in the Great Lakes state, we are having problems getting clean water to our citizens. So that has just organically come up. I really hadn't thought that I'd be running on things like environmental security, but it just everywhere I went, people were talking about it. And then preserving our open spaces, preserving our way of life here in Michigan. We have a huge number of hunters and anglers, and preserving our open spaces, our natural heritage has become a really passionate issue for a lot of people. So these issues link a lot of, many corners of our district.
And I can tell you those are also issues that are important to us in Wisconsin. Over on the other side of the lake, we also are very concerned about our waterways and our public land and keeping our environment clean and healthy.
And to be honest with you, if I were elected, one of the first things I would do is try to really enhance and double down on a Great Lakes caucus, right?
Yes.
So members of both parties, Republican and Democrat, from all of the Great Lakes states, everyone who has a stake in the Great Lakes should be coming together and meeting as a bipartisan group all the time, because what happens over here affects you all, right? If we start polluting our sides of the lakes, then it's going to affect you all and vice versa. And so really ramping up and doing it as a bipartisan issue, because I do think it's one of those things that unites people. And we kind of only have one shot at this. So that's something I'd love to do, is sort of double down on a Great Lakes caucus.
I love that idea. My husband is always insisting that we're not Midwesterners, we're Great Lakers. He's insisting. He's always the Great Lakes are different. We're our own culture up here. So that's a great idea, and I think that would be really exciting to see that.
Yeah. So we do have, my understanding is we do have some members from a number of the Great Lakes states who do occasionally meet. I would just double down, enhance it, make it a big thing, and then again, as much as possible, keep it a bipartisan project, and demonstrate, frankly, to the rest of the country that there are issues where Democrats and Republicans can agree, can work together, can get things done. And we need a little bit more of that. We need some positive examples against the backdrop of so much vitriol and just dysfunction.
So you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of hunters in Michigan. What does it look like in Michigan, this issue of guns and gun safety? I know that this is something that in a lot of Midwestern Great Lakes states is something that people really struggle with, this idea of we want the freedom to have guns and to do the hunting that we do, but yet we need to think about gun safety.
Yep. So, my approach to this is, dictated by my background. We grew up in a gun-owning family. When I was trained for my 3 tours in Iraq, I carried a Glock and an M4, and my husband, as a career Army officer, carried a weapon every day that he was deployed, as does my stepdaughter today. So we are big believers in the Second Amendment, but I think because of my national security background and because of my experience with firearms, I believe that we can talk about common sense gun safety. And for me, that means universal background checks, right? That's something that I think many, many gun owners understand, right? Closing all the loopholes so that no matter where you're buying a gun, you go through a background check to make sure that domestic abusers, terrorists, and mentally ill people can't get weapons. I think that's critically important. And I think that the most important thing is being able, as a congressperson, as someone who's interested in moving this debate forward, is being willing to see problems on the ground, discuss those problems, and then come up with a way forward. And that's something that the U.S. Congress has just been derelict at. right? We obviously have an issue to discuss about gun safety. It's obviously a controversial issue. No one is saying we have to agree, but we do have to at least acknowledge the problem and have a conversation about it, right? And come up with a way forward. And to me, one of those areas of common ground for most people is on universal background checks and closing all the loopholes. That's, I think, particularly important.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you want to make sure that our listeners know about you or about Michigan?
I think what's interesting, particularly for you guys being Great Lakes folks or Midwestern folks as well, is, you know that at least here in Michigan, and I think in Wisconsin too, Michiganders do not fit well into political boxes, right? Washington likes to put us in boxes, but we don't really fit there. And we're a swing state. We've always been a swing state that cares about the person over the party. So we have people who are rabid feminists who are avid hunters. We have conservative farmers who believe in legalizing marijuana. We have kind of the whole playbook. And I think that's a good thing. And I think the Great Lakes states and the Midwest can be a real example to places like Washington, where they just sort of assume you have to be one thing or the other thing. So I actually really hope for this next congressional election that not only do we put a check and balance on some of the worst impulses of this administration, but we see the real rise of Midwestern leaders, Great Lakes leaders. I think we have a real role to play in getting our country out of the divisive politics that we've now found ourselves in. And I think given that we're, a diverse group politically, we have the ability to lead on those issues in ways that maybe folks from California or New York it might not be as easy for them. So I'm hoping for great things for Midwestern leaders in general, Great Lakes leaders. And I just really appreciate you guys doing the podcast. It's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really great conversation, and we're definitely going to be watching your race.
That's great. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
Are Democrats set to ride a blue wave in 2018?
Pundits say yes, but then again, these are the same people that said there was no way in hell that Donald Trump would ever be president.
I'm Eric Heffinger.
And I'm Soham Manik.
And we're the hosts of Blue Wave Pod, a weekly political podcast from the front lines of the battle to redefine the Democratic Party.
There is a tremendous amount of energy out there, but so many different opinions on how to harness that energy and win elections.
We're on the ground, talking with campaigns, grassroots activists, and voters who are working to make this blue wave a reality.
It's a pivotal moment in our country, and we only have one chance to get this right. Join the conversation with us on Blue Wave Pod, available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and your favorite podcast app.
Today, we are talking to Mark Osmack, who is running for Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Would you want to tell us just a little bit about your campaign and a little bit about the 2nd District?
Sure. So our campaign started in July of 2017. And so we've been at this for about 9 months or so now. But it's been an absolutely wonderful experience so far. The primary for Missouri is pretty late. It's on August 7th. The general is essentially 3 months after the primary. So it's pretty quick, as we say in the Army, flash to bang. So kind of right after that. The district itself is the suburbs primarily. So if you think of any city, whether it's Cincinnati, St. Louis, or Chicago, we have the 2nd Congressional District is almost all of the St. Louis County area west of St. Louis City.
Tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for Congress.
My background, born and raised in St. Louis, 4th generation St. Louisan. I went to public school the entire time, then wanted to become filthy rich, so I became an English major at the University of Missouri, where I made just millions on semicolons and Oxford commas. So after that, I made the best decision of my life and joined the Army. So I joined in 2008. A little bit later in life, I was 26. So the way that works, if you're out of college, you can't do ROTC anymore. Obviously, I did not go to a service academy such as West Point or Air Force Academy. So I did Army OCS, which is Officer Candidate School. So after all the basic training and officer training and airborne school, I was an artillery. I trained for artillery. So I did that and was stationed first in Germany, which was absolutely wonderful, and deployed to Afghanistan during the surge of 2010 to 11, and deployed for a year in southern part of Afghanistan in 2 provinces, so Kandahar province and also Zabul province, Zabul. So doing artillery, but primarily we were dismounted, meaning we're just doing patrols throughout the different areas, rural and urban areas. And I did that for a year. and then came back, more training, and then deployed with the 101st Airborne 2013 to 14 and worked on staff there. After that, wanted to try my hand at something else. So I used the GI Bill and was able to work on my master's in public administration in the evenings in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. So during that time, in the day, I worked on the Hill. So I started off with Senator McCaskill, who of course is a senator from Missouri. And then that led to a defense fellowship with, at the time, Representative Tammy Duckworth. She's the Iraq war hero. So the gist of her, for those who don't know, she left her PhD program, called up to serve in Iraq. She was a helicopter pilot, a Black Hawk pilot, and she deployed to Iraq in 2003, was shot down, lost both of her legs, and then came back and has just been amazing ever since. So she ran for U.S. House and won, and then ran for U.S. Senate 2016 and won there against an incumbent, Mark Kirk from Illinois. So I worked for her for almost a year, just about a year, and then after that, worked on the House Armed Services Committee, minority staff, which is the Democrats, and so did that. So I got the big takeaway is got to see the Senate side a little, but really focused on the House from the membership level and then also committee after that. So the way this whole thing transpired, public service has been a fascination of mine for a very, very long time. I know everyone has a different calling. This is something that I've just been terribly interested in from a very oddly early age. So the way it kicked off was a little over a year ago, I'm still in the Army Reserves, and I was checking out serial numbers on different property in the Army and Reserves. And I got a phone call from an Illinois number, and I didn't have it saved, and I answered it, and it was Senator Tammy Duckworth. And she said, "Mark, I talked to Senator Dick Durbin about you, and we want you to run for U.S. Congress." And my hand starts shaking, and then that's what started it. So that's how we kicked off.
Excellent. And Tammy Duckworth, of course, is also a new mother, which we're very excited about the rule change, allowing her to bring her newborn onto the Senate floor.
Yeah. She just turned 50, it's her second daughter, and that has opened up a lot of changes, kind of bringing, new reforms through a pretty, I guess, I don't want to say archaic, but stoic and unchanged organization such as the United States Senate. So she's the first woman in U.S. Senate history to give birth while serving, which is just amazing. But what that's done is it's opened her eyes to some of the challenges that are in the Senate or in the government as a whole. So one, as you mentioned, was, can I bring my daughter? That's one issue. But another one that she recognized when she was still a congresswoman in Illinois was that she was trying to breastfeed in an airport, and she could not find a place to go. And so, of course, not wanting to do it in a bathroom, she thought, well, my goodness, if I can't find somewhere to breastfeed, who else can? And so she is also looking and pushing legislation to require airports to provide breastfeeding rooms that are not restrooms. So things like that she has been made aware of this new experience of motherhood, and fascinating stuff, and just pushing women's rights to the forefront, saying, hey, these things are outdated, and starting to make positive change.
All right. So as someone who has been in the Army, been in combat, you received a Bronze Star, you're from a military family, and you have a master's in public administration. So we want to talk to you a little bit about national security, issues of national security and defense. So can you tell us what you think is sort of the biggest issue of national security right now?
Sure. There are a couple. I think one of the things that gets a lot of attention are what are perceived to be threats overseas, and there certainly are some. But while that gets a lot of the attention in the media, there are some things actually here at home that are more challenging or could pose a more immediate threat than, say another country that might be an adversary. So one of those is cyber. And I know some people might be thinking, you're talking about Russia or meddling in the elections, but it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. So the example that I use is when I was working for Representative Duckworth, we were looking into who has access to sensitive systems or activities on military bases. So a concrete example is, let's say you're at Fort Hood, Texas, the largest base in the United States, Army base. Every military base, the large one, is self-contained. So they have their own water supply, electrical supply, etc., so that if anything happens, they can still continue their mission without negative impact. One of them is, bottom line, if you are, let's say there are 20 people working at the electrical facility on a military base, it's often not required that you have a security clearance. And the so what of that is there could be people possibly that could be compromised but also just a lack of internal security. So while